So let me just go on with this and just look at one important issue here. When you use the concept of regulation, that you're taking the step of defining one aspect of the mind as regulatory, you come up with a really interesting thing that has, I think, some very potentially huge implications. What does it mean if we're saying the mind is a regulatory process? What do you do if you're going to regulate something? So you have attention. So one thing is you've got to actually monitor where things are going. You got to pay attention. So like if you're driving a bicycle or a car or something, you have to monitor. Right, so monitoring would be paying attention, blocking some things out, focusing yourself, not getting distracted, absolutely. And you have to control. And what'd you say? And picking
adjustments.
And adjusting something, so let's call that modulation or modification, or you have to modulate or modify or something like that.
You also have to create balance or find a balance point
Of
whatever it is that you're doing, in terms of if it's regulating energy flow, not too much to where you're
okay, so let's put that under modulate or modify. That would be more like modifying. So modulate or modify. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that these two functions, monitoring and modulating or modifying, are things that people often don't think of when they think of mind. But if you do take the step to say one aspect of mind is that's regulatory, the next thing to say, and now this is a different issue than just cities, it's more like a policy issue on the national level, certainly on the educational level, is if you sit down with teachers, and I may have asked 100,000 mental health professionals about this, but I've asked about 2,000 now teachers. I'll ask a few more next week. But they also don't have a definition of mind, and they never teach children how to strengthen their minds. If you say to a teacher, K through 12, we've had discussions also in this room and meetings we've had, you say, well, what are you interested in developing your child? They go, I want my child to have a strong mind. You go, fantastic. What do you do to do that? Well, I teach them facts and some skills, like they can read and write. And then you say, well, what's the mind? They go, I have no idea. So if you were going to actually revolutionize the field of education, what you do is stop having us be in the situation where we've lost our mind, literally, and you'd say, okay, well, every teacher should teach a child to monitor energy and information flow in the body and in relationships. And then kids would be taught literally how to sense their breathing, which is what basically mindfulness 101 is. They would be able to sense what's going on in their heart, where studies show if you do that, you actually calm and balance your nervous system. They'd be able to get access to a gut feeling. Literally, there are neural nets around the gut and the heart that bring up wisdom of the body. None of this is taught in schools for the most part. Some programs do, but...
It is taught in school. And my son goes to a school right now.
Fantastic. What school is that?
It's a Montessori.
Yeah, Montessori school. But in general, in public schools, unless they have emotional intelligence being taught or a Montessori school, this is just basically the vast majority of our citizens don't get this. So in terms of who are the citizens of cities, you're talking about people going through an entire system where they're never taught to monitor this energy and information flow. And now I'm going to ask you, is there a principle we can gather? How would you teach a child, let's say if we said, we're all trying to make the world a better place, and 50 years from now, maybe many of us won't be here, but 50 years from now, the next generation inheriting our cities and our planet will have become stronger and have better relationships with the planet. How would you want them, is there a general principle of how they would modulate energy and information flow? And to put that into one little simple sentence, what is a healthy mind? And could you offer public school teachers a foundation on how to actually create through K through 12, a healthy, resilient mind. Not just filled with reading, writing, arithmetic, but maybe another 3 R's: reflection, relationships, and resilience, where you would actually give them the tools to make a strong mind. And the question I'm going to ask you to just reflect on for a moment, and I think you'll see it, I hope it has some implications for practical application in cities. I think there's an answer to that. Now, what I'm about to tell you comes from a field I work in, which is called interpersonal neurobiology. So from that meeting of those 40 scientists, I started going crazy trying to answer these questions back in 1992, 93. And what emerged from that drive was writing a book called The Developing Mind, which basically proposes a field called interpersonal neurobiology. And that field, which began then, basically is a field that combines all the different disciplines of science, from anthropology to biology to mathematics to physics to all the sciences, into one framework. And it asks the question, what is the mind and what's a healthy mind? And since that time now, there's a series of books that we have, almost 24 books. I've edited most of them that have now been published. And we have this whole approach to say, you can actually address that question, and you can make proposals for how at least clinicians, mental health practitioners, can deal with this. So I'm going to now show you one way of approaching it, and you please tell me if, first of all, if it makes sense, but if you see any application for the incredibly important work that you're doing. And basically this takes, since 1992, so how many years is that? Almost 20 years of deep thinking and publications and teaching and applying this. So I'm going to give you the take-home message, but please understand this didn't just pop out of nowhere. This came from reading thousands and thousands of scientific articles. In fact, The Developing Mind, I had 15 interns working with me this summer, and I gave them the task of revising it, and I said, I want you to disprove this whole book and take these premises that I'm telling you about and prove that they're wrong. That's our job. And so we reviewed literally 2,000 more references to back up what I'm about to tell you. So here's the issue. Now, if we can do this a number of ways. I can have you take guesses at it, and we could spend a week doing it, or let's do it in reverse. I'll give you what I think the answer is, and you can see what the joke was, or whatever, what the question was. Here's the weird idea. That if you can teach a person to monitor energy and information flow with more stability, so that what they perceive has more depth and clarity and detail, so that's the monitoring part. The next question is, how should they modify? Does it help to just monitor? Is that all you need to do? Or is there some other fundamental principle? So this now is incorporating every bit of research I could ever find anywhere on health or well-being or resilience or anything like that, and it boils it down to one word, which is kind of weird, but here's the word. Integration. So tomorrow and the next day, Jack Kornfield and I will be doing something we do all over the country. In New York City, we'll be teaching almost 1,000 mental health professionals about how does Buddhist practice from 2,500 years relate to interpersonal neurobiology, so we combine the two. And I can tell you, because I've done this with Jack a bunch of times, this concept fits with contemplative practice. If you review the whole field of mental health, you'll see in a moment, if you define integration, what is integration? Well, it's defined simply as the linkage or connection of differentiated parts. Of a system, whatever that system is. So Integration is not the same as blending. So like if you took a bunch of fruit and made a smoothie, we wouldn't call that integrated. That would be just homogeneous. So integration has implied that the differentiated components of your system maintain their differentiated aspects, but then they're linked. So let me ask you, and we've never done this here before, I don't think. No, I don't think we've done it. Do any of you sing in a choir? 3. We can't do it with 3. 4? You sing in a band. We could, well, 4. Would any of you be willing to try singing if you don't sing in a choir? Have you ever sung in a choir? You're a good editor for me. Okay, so would you be willing to do a demonstration up here? Okay, come on up. Let's have our Garrison singers. Come on. This will just give you a feeling of, come on up here on stage. Thank you for clarifying that. You're so helpful. No, don't worry. Anything you do, they're going to do too. So, okay, great. Okay, so Celia, will you pick a note? First, we're going to do 3 demonstrations just to give you a feeling in your body. And since we're talking about awareness, what I'll just invite you to do is just let yourself become aware of whatever you feel. You don't have to analyze it or explain it. Just let yourself feel whatever you feel with what we're about to do. Okay? So, Celia, will you pick a note? And then what I'm going to ask you to do is just, if you can, try to sing the note exactly the same way with each other. So that's demonstration number 1. Now demonstration number 2, let me describe it to you in total before you do it. I'm going to ask you to plug your ears really, really tightly so you cannot hear anyone else. Wait. And then I'm going to ask you to sing a song with words loudly when I raise my hands. And they're going to do it too, don't worry. So you'll be able to experience it. And then when I put my hands down, you can stop singing. Okay? Any song you want.
Trees.
Excellent, very good. Okay, now, very good. Okay, now your turn so they can learn from that. So plug your ears and pick a song, any song you want. Very good. Let's give them a hand. Now, what I'd like you to do is get together and watch the steps, and I'd like you to pick a song that you're going to sing together.
I was doing relational. What a wonderful world it could be. What a wonderful time to be free. Is that what we're talking about?
I know the words. We all know that.
Do you know Amazing Grace? You know Amazing Grace? Okay, you ready? Amazing Grace, you ready?
We can do Amazing Grace. We can do all along the watch.
That's tonight, you can do that. All right, so you ready? Do you want me to do anything, or you want to just do it yourselves? Do you need me to do this?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, ready? You know what you're singing? Amazing Grace? Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Just hold on for a few more moments. So let's just compare that. We have 3 demonstrations. The first one, what did you feel on that one? Can you imagine if that went on for half an hour? Just like that. You know, this is a little hard because we do have overtones and it's actually kind of interesting. But if you can imagine a single tone, ba, you know, like that. What do we call that? Boring. Boring. Thank you. Monotony. Okay, how about number 2? What did number 2 feel like? It was cacophony. It was chaos. Okay, now before we get to what did number 3 feel like? Amazing Grace. It felt like harmony. It felt amazing. How did it feel in your body? What's that? It felt resonating, interesting, connected. Okay. And you wanted to sing too? Okay, great. So just let's analyze this, okay? So in number 1, was there differentiation? No. Was there linkage? Yes. But you don't get integration unless you get both. And that was an example of rigidity, nothing changing, totally predictable. So one thing we need to do, just for fun, is put in maybe green. So one thing we know is that away from integration, one side is rigidity. And then let's do number 2. What does number 2 feel like? Was there differentiation? Yes. Was there linkage? No. So was there integration? No. So you saw the other one went to chaos. And it turns out all of psychopathology falls into that pattern. The entire diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders falls into symptoms of syndromes that are either chaotic, rigid, or both. And we now are having the technology to show that those disorders are associated with impaired integration in the brain. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment. Now let's do number 3, Amazing Grace. Was there differentiation? Yes. They had intervals and they were doing. Was there linkage? Yes. And was it integrated? Yes. In fact, the integration, a synonym for integration, is in fact harmony. So if you ever want to just say, what did that integration feel like? Harmony. So let's hear it for our Garrison singers. Thank you so much for volunteering. And thanks for your advice. Expand the thing. So here's the proposal. It's going to sound painfully simple, and it's an open proposal worth studying. Here's the proposal. Integration is health, period. Integration is health, so that when you have a mind that is able to regulate energy and information flow in relationships and the body, the embodied brain thing, in a way that links differentiated parts, you get well-being. If you have a city that's going to promote integration of these 3 elements within a community, because after all, it's based on, a city is all about the play space of relationships, you have an opportunity actually to think very deeply then about how to create a city that promotes health. Because what we have here is this moment, by linking all these sciences together, over a dozen different disciplines of science are behind this issue, from mathematics to biology. Basically, we're at this moment, including psychology, we're at this moment to say, if integration is health, what are the integrative experiences that can unfold? Because we know that experience shapes the structure of the brain. So to say it really simply, for example, I'm an attachment researcher, when I study parent-child relationships, okay, I basically am studying how parents allow children to be differentiated and then communicate with them, link with them in a compassionate, attuned way. So I'm studying the integrative relational process, and here's the amazing thing, and this, if I didn't have a bunch of books that we've already published to say the science behind this, you'd think this is way, way, way too simple, but we actually do have that science. If you look at this brain that I've drawn here, you can show that for a child who's experienced integrative communication, it's the integrative fibers of this brain that grow. What's an integrative fiber? It's a fiber that, for example, connects the higher cortex to the lower limbic area that's here, to the lower brainstem, to the body, and even links other people. And I'll show you that in just a moment. You can show that attuned communication between a parent and a child is associated with, and we believe it causes, the growth of these integrative fibers. And here's the key thing. Integration, literally, in the brain means you're a fiber that's connecting differentiated areas to each other. That's the definition of integration. It's just in the brain. You can show that all the fibers in the brain that, bless you, that are regulatory are integrative. So when I said before, whoa, mindful awareness is associated with the thickening, the strengthening of regulatory fibers, I could have just as easily said integrative fibers. Because I believe mindful awareness is actually a form of something called internal attunement. When you have the observing self tune into the experiencing self, and there's a whole book on that, you can read it, The Mindful Brain, but internal attunement is the focusing of attention in a way that promotes the growth of these exact same fibers that grow in secure parent-child relationships where it's interpersonal attunement. Now, that sounds kind of weird until you realize that the system we're talking about is energy and information flow. So whatever supports this flow, literally having differentiated areas becoming linked, is going to promote a healthy, integrated brain, a resilient mind, and empathic, supportive relationships. That's the whole model. So from the city point of view, then anything you can do to support integration would be creating a healthy city. And the integration, for example, would be honoring the health of the planet, so that the differentiation between one human being and the earth in which they live is honored and a linkage is created. When I know I keep on bad-mouthing LA, but in general, for the white people in LA or whatever, for the isolated, alienated urbanite, wherever you are, the issue is there's no linkage. There's excessive differentiation, and people are miserable. So I'm not here to tell you that I think we should all become blended as one, big we, because after all, blending, the smoothie, is not what integration is. And I want to really underscore that. Integration means that you're honoring, let's say in the brain, these different areas. An example of impaired differentiation in the brain, for example, is autism. Autism, kids have bigger brains, but they're not differentiated. The window during the first couple of years of life where differentiation keeps on happening so the areas can specialize seems to shut down for some reason we cannot figure out, and obviously we need to know. Because we went from 4 in 10,000 to less than more than 1 in 100 kids with autism. It's whatever is happening in our environment, because we don't think it's the experience parents are giving, something extremely serious is happening to shut down the differentiation of this brain. We believe it somehow, we don't know how, that's leading to this huge increase in kids with undifferentiated nervous systems. Now, when it's undifferentiated, you obviously can't attain the same integrative health that you can. But just to honor experience too, we also now know in the last few years that kids who are abused and neglected have linkage neurons that are destroyed. That's out of Harvard, out of Marty Teicher's work. Or if you've inherited a disorder like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, genetically caused impairments to the integrative fibers. So this is not about like what caused it or what didn't cause it, and this is more if we were mental health professionals worried about this, but for city people thinking about like how do you actually plan a city? We need to realize that these are not fixed things. This brain didn't just like pop out of a bunch of genes and then what you do with cities has nothing to do with it. So let me give you a brief overview of brain development so you can understand why the environment that a city supports can support integration or not. Basically, let's just do it this way. If you take your hand and orient your hand like this, so your thumb's in the middle and you put your fingers on the top, this would be a very handy model of the brain, and it goes like this. So the person would be oriented like this, and so actually, before we even get into this, I'm going to do something even more earlier than this. When the sperm and egg get together, two partial entities become a whole. You know that. But here's the amazing thing. The one cell becomes two. Similar cells, they become 4. Similar cells, 8, 16, 32, 64, right? Et cetera, et cetera. This glob of cells grows until at some point the glob is so big, there's outer cells and there's inner cells. The first differentiation is outer and inner. The outer layer we call the ectoderm. Now, before we get to the hand model of the brain, let's just watch this. Put your fingers together like this and see where your fingernails are? That's the ectoderm. You remember this from biology. Make your knuckles now come in and kiss each other as the fingers go inside the glob of cells. Okay? And see where those fingernails are? Okay? That's the origin of the nervous system. The nervous system is basically extremely specialized skin cells. Now, the skin has its whole purpose as the interface between the outer world and the inner world. And so while we're going to talk about the brain right now, we need to know it's basically super sophisticated ectoderm whose job philosophically and embryologically and in every kind of way is always to interface the inner and the outer. So when people use the word like social brain, that's a no-brainer because, in fact, the nervous system is all about connecting to other nervous systems. That's why people are, texting when they're driving. They're so desperate. If you think about it, I mean, you've seen this, right? You go into a restaurant, you'll see people doing that, even with somebody else, right? We're so interconnected. We need to have our nervous systems need to be connected. Okay, so now this thing is growing. That's the neural tube. So now forget that model. Let's go to the hand model. So the spinal cord is represented in your wrist. And if you lift up your fingers, lift up your thumb, the first part of the brain to develop in the womb is the brain stem, which is very old. So some people call it the reptilian brain. It's 300 million years old at least. It helps regulate the heart and the intestines and how alert you are and things like that. And there's also nuclei or clusters of neurons there that help the fight, flight, freeze response, which is going to be really important when we talk about cities in just a moment. So the fight, flight, freeze response, very deep, very old, 300 million years old. Then, if you put the thumb back over, you'd have two thumbs to be a perfect model. This is called the limbic area. It evolved 200 million years ago when we became mammals. 5 big things it does. I'll just name them, but don't worry about it. The basic thing is it works very closely with the brainstem and the body to create something we call emotion. These are all below the cortex. That's the subcortical origin of emotion. It works with these areas to create motivational systems that drive behavior. So in terms of climate change issue, you can't just deal with the cortex. You've got to go below the cortex with what you're designing, or it's not going to do anything. So that's motivation. It also appraises the meaning of things. Appraisal has a bunch of components that are worth labeling, even though I know these are a lot of details, because it has everything to do with how inner states become outer behavior. So here's how it works. Basically, this is what we understand of the system. Step number 1 is it orients attention by saying, this thing right now is important. That's a limbic function. It's called appraisal. So when the person has the plastic bottle and throws it in the trash instead of recycling, you know their limbic area did not appraise that as important. And we call them mindless, but let's not call them names. Let's just say their limbic area just didn't appraise it as important. Let's say it for what it is. So, number 1, is this thing important? And if it's important, I orient attention to it. So I'm about to throw something away, and I'm throwing it, oh, there's a recycling bin 40 feet away. I'm going to hold on to this thing for another minute, and I'll drop it over there. That means I had to orient my attention to what I was doing. I had to be mindful, and not only did I have to be aware, I had to care. So that's orientation. That's what it's called. Number 2, once I orient, I then have this thing called hedonic evaluation, where I say, is this thing good or bad? Is it good or bad? So, a year ago, we had this big discussion in climate, mind, and behavior about how the efforts to make climate change issues matter first started with the strategy of scaring people, and it didn't work. And when you look at this system of the brain, basically, if this system feels scared, it will actually think it's a bad thing. And instead of orienting attention toward it, because it's a scary bad thing, it actually orients it away from it. So that's actually not a strategy you really want to do. So this step number 2, hedonic evaluation, says, is it good or bad? If it's bad, I'm going to get away from it. That's the subcortical non-conscious process. I'm going to get away from it. If it's good, I'm going to want to go toward it and do something with it. So that's really crucial in terms of the strategies you do, because if you're hedonically evaluating bad and go away, you're not going to get a behavior you want to see. This is why I think scaring people didn't work. Okay, so that's number 2. Then once you now are hedonic evaluating it's bad or it's good, now you start activating behaviors. There's a whole arousal system that starts happening. So part of that is, in quote, emotion is generated. And I put quotes about it because nobody knows what emotion is. So you can imagine the kind of conversations I have with scientists about emotion, because they don't have a definition of emotion. But the great thing is the term itself can give us a feeling. Emotion, it evokes motion. So for everything you're doing about climate change issues in cities, you want to evoke motion, that is, engage behavior. That's what evoking motion. So it's going to be emotional. In fact, there's probably nothing that happens in the brain that isn't emotional, really. So the separation of emotion from thinking makes absolutely no sense. I know we have different words for it. It just makes no sense. Everything is, in quote, emotional, because the brain is always evaluating the meaning of things. This is the appraisal part. So it starts generating an emotion. Then it starts generating, it already started generating bodily responses, heart rate pounding, and you're breathing, and you're smiling or not smiling. And these bodily things start feeding back to the brain to let it know about what's happening. So you can do all sorts of studies where if you have a person do this because they're like holding a pencil under their lip, like that, and they don't know that's what they're doing, and they read a neutral story, they'll think the story is very sad. And then if you have them hold the pencil above here, or they're like this, they'll actually think the story is happy. So the brain is constantly saying, what's my body feeling? What's my body doing? And, this is why the thing about the subway. If you go in a subway with a bunch of people you don't know who might pick your pocket, and you're like this, and you're like, there's a whole system we're going to talk about in a moment called Neuroception that Steve Porges writes about. And Neuroception basically is the way these systems, including a part we're about to talk about, constantly evaluating, is it safe or is it dangerous? Always. That's called neuroception. And if it's safe, the system relaxes, people are open, they can laugh. It turns on what he calls a social engagement system. And there's a whole book called The Polyvagal Theory, if you want to read about this. But if it assesses there's danger, if I'm threatened, I'm going to activate my brainstem nuclei to make a fight, flight, freeze response. So the problem we have here is that we have city life that is abnormal to what we've evolved to be in, and you have human brains that are constantly neuroceptively evaluating whether it's safe or dangerous, and they're basically finding a way to deal with their either anger, fear, or that is, fighting, fleeing, or freezing, or just getting plain old numb and not engaging like that. And people can go through day after day after week after year after a lifetime like this, and this is why people just feel dead before they die. because they're not engaged. Yeah. When I said abnormal, you mean the city thing? Yeah, well, because I think we evolved in terms of how this brain system evolved. The brain system that we have evolved not so long ago so that the world you lived in, when you saw someone's face, you knew that person. And you saw maybe 50, 60, 70, 100, maybe 150 people at most. This was your community. So as you grew up, you knew these people. These were your people. And you all had differentiated roles and different personalities and temperaments and all that stuff. But you knew everyone. That's what I mean. I mean, so from how we've evolved to be, connected as a community, now, for many of us anyway, that doesn't exist. Now, you probably know the studies of social capital, where when you study a community like in Chicago, you can study two really, really lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, and you show one has high social capital. You know this study, right? High social capital is basically, can you ask to borrow some sugar from a person who lives near you? I mean, that's in a nutshell. It's the informal relationships we have. When social capital is high, crime is low, morale is high. People are happy. That's those studies, basically. So this is what I mean, is that we are an amazingly adaptive species. So we can go anywhere on the planet because we have each other. We don't have big claws, we don't have big fangs, but we got our brains and we got each other. We're unbelievably social. So in that sense, we can go with each other places and adapt. But on the other hand, we have these big cities where, my gosh, you just don't know anyone. So our whole system didn't evolve to live like this. That's what I mean by abnormal. Or not normal.
It seems like a very loaded statement to me, because in some respects the history of cities is really the history of people fleeing overly rigid social conditions that they were born into. And there's a lot of kind of literature on this in the history of cities, and not in terms of kind of push-pulls of why people even go to cities.
Yeah.
And I think to me, it represents a hot button, because I think we're all struggling with this question of what is normal. And
yeah, well, so let me,
normal,
sure.
It can be normal environments for people.
So let me expand on that. I don't think there's anything inherent in cities that make them abnormal. And I'm thinking about, I'm having a naming moment now, but the book Bowling Alone, right? Robert Putnam. This is the idea that, in a city, you can have bowling, which is fantastic, Like my father-in-law, for example, is a farmer. And there was a time when he lived on the farm, a family farm, and all the stuff that happened with family farms in Wisconsin. And anyway, he lost his farm. We were really upset for him, but then he moved to a city, and we were so happy because he loves to bowl. So he would be on a whole bunch of bowling teams. And he doesn't bowl alone. He golfs with people, he bowls with people, he goes out to dinner, he now works in an insurance company, and he has a bunch of connections, and he's not just relating to cows. So, so I have nothing against cities. So I didn't at all mean to imply that cities are abnormal. What I mean is that my father-in-law is a great example of a guy who found community and bowls with people. But if you take Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, you can show from a scientific point of view that we've taken those structures like bowling as an opportunity to connect, and then we just leave the bowling, So that's all I mean to say. And I appreciate, and I often don't use the word abnormal, but what I mean to say is that the cities and even the country can be that way. People just get too isolated, And I know when I worked in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, in the winter, it was the countryside, people were unbelievably depressed in the countryside because they weren't connected to each other. So again, it comes back to that integration thing. And I think we need to realize that that's what we need as a species to live. I don't want to use the word normal, but to live a healthy life is find a way to bowl together as a metaphor. Does that make sense? Because I totally agree with you. I don't mean to put down cities whatsoever. Here's the thing, and I want to, if it's so, let me take these two questions, but I do want to get through the whole brain thing. So, okay, so we're now at this evaluative part where emotion evokes motion. And then there's a whole feedback loop, so a person's going to engage in really a way that you can understand, I think, best here, because someone talked about self-regulation and equilibrium and all that kind of stuff. if the mind is the self-emergent organizing process that's self-organizing, that's regulating this whole thing, you can see where a person then is going to use relationships. So my father-in-law is no longer, on the farm, and then he uses it to actually find this great joy in relationships. And he's happy, right? So he finds meaning in relationships. So his mind, his sense of choice, the emotional experience he had, in quote, emotional experience, got him to live in a city and find the connections that could bring him health. And he's laughing, and he's fun, and he's full of, stuff, and we put on this big 70th birthday party for him, and his bowling partners come up, and they give him, because he works in an insurance company too, they give him this briefcase with this huge bowling ball embedded in it, as if he's going to hide that he's a bowler, but it's that kind of thing. So you can see where relationships, if we could get in his brain, would show his brain is getting integrated because his mind got him to do these things in relationship. That's the idea. So, okay, so that's the emotion piece, and that's in part what this limbic area does. It also, very importantly, is about different aspects of memory, but the part for all of us to know about is attachment. Attachment is something we developed 200 million years ago. It's basically where, for a baby, you look for a wiser, stronger other with whom you can rely on to be seen, to feel safe, and to be secure. Okay, and that's a whole huge study, but what we believe happens is to be seen, safe, and secure. Now, as you grow up, you find other people, best friends, girlfriend, boyfriend, ultimately, if you find a spouse, who will become your attachment figure. So there is something called adult attachment, and we also believe that a group can be an attachment figure. Membership in a religion can be an attachment figure, maybe even a community center, where you actually have your attachment needs, these limbic needs, to be seen, to feel safe, to be secure. Just if you memorize those 3 S's, you could create a whole structure of what communities need. Because people throughout their lifespan, because we're mammals and because we're animals, we need to feel attached. Seen, safe, and secure. Now, of course, in certain neighborhoods, you don't feel that because it's really dangerous. Or you can be in a safe neighborhood, but you don't feel seen. There's all sorts of ways where people's attachment needs are not met. So it'd be interesting to think about how do you actually think about a city that exists and how you could actually support relationships that would become sources of being seen and secure and safe. Okay, so that's the limbic area.